Okay. Welcome everybody to our final installment of Siren Nation Speaks for 2021. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to welcome three authors who I'll introduce momentarily for a poetry reading and process talk, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from them today. Just a couple of housekeeping items before I introduce them and turn it over to them. Siren Nation, which is the organizer of this series, is a nonprofit organization based in Portland, Oregon. Our mission is to promote women artists and artists of all marginalized genders, primarily in the Pacific Northwest and Oregon, and to inspire and empower others to create their own art. We would like to thank the Regional Arts and Culture Council for supporting Siren Nation Speaks with a grant in 2021. And if you want to learn more about our programming, volunteer opportunities, or donating, you can visit us at sirennation.org. And now we're very excited to welcome these three wonderful authors, and they'll be reading in the following order. Dao Strom is an artist who works with three voices, written, sung, and visual. And her most recent release is the poetry collection Instrument from Phonograph Editions and its companion album, Traveler's Ode, a joint release of Phonograph and Antiquated Future Records. Following her will be Michele Glazer, who is the author of 4 books of poetry, most recently Fretwork, just released from the University of Iowa Press. Michele teaches in the MFA and BFA programs at Portland State University here in Portland. And third, and we have to thank also Endi Bogue Hartigan for helping organize this and inviting these other 2 authors to participate. We really appreciate that. We're excited to host you. And Endi's 3rd book of poetry, Orchid O'Clock, is forthcoming from Omnidon Publishing in spring 2023. And her chapbook, The Seaweed and Treble Clef. Did I get that right?
The Seaweed Said Treble Clef.
Oh, The Seaweed Said Treble Clef, sorry. A sequence of poems and photographs was published this year by Oxeye Press. And with that, I will turn it over to Dao Strom. I've stopped sharing my screen actually, and turn it over to Dao Strom.
Hello, thank you. Thank you, Endi, for inviting me here, and thank you to Siren Nation for having us. Can everyone hear me all right? My sound's okay?
Yes.
So yeah, I am delighted to be able to read with Endi and Michele, and I look forward to talking after our reading and just sharing some ideas. We did a little bit of a sort of preview. We had a conversation, and I'm looking forward to continuing that about process. I am going to read, I'm going to read a long poem, and it's from this book, Instrument, which is my most recent book, which was published by Phonograph Editions, and it has a musical companion, Traveler's Ode, which is an album of what I called song poems, which was released by Antiquated Future Records, as my bio says. I am going to read a poem that is a long poem, and it's about voice, it's about music, it's sort of a little bit about the relationship between music and poetry for myself. What inspired it was I spent 2 months at a residency in Iceland a couple of years ago. And I had a moment at the residency where we were sharing work, and we were, gathering in this little church, and I was going to sing a song, and I forgot the words to the song as I was about to sing it. And I didn't know what to do. I was like trying to get started, and something kind of clicked in me, and I just started singing, like not words, just like, vocalizations. And that was a moment for me, which it was not something that I normally do. And so that's a little bit of what inspired this poem. And also there are references to Anne Carson and Teresa Hack-Kyun-Shaw in the poem, which are influences of mine. And then in general, just writers that I was reading while I was there. I actually, at the end of my residency, I found a poem that Anne Carson had written about being in Iceland herself, called Wildly Constant. And that sort of gave me some fuel for the shape of this poem. So it's called In Dead Time, and it's after Anne Carson, and just inspired by that poem. In the small triangular church of the world's youngest island, I lost the note usually would anchor. music too, a form of wind pushing me away from the shore of words. I had brought with myself anchors of selves, it's true. Some of us always lead with our undertow. I thought the anchor note, a D, maybe a slippery A. At any rate, I could not find where to begin. History has such heavy feathers. History has so many tiny feathers, tiny deaths. Cataclysms reign history, and life is short. But here, where the invisible are seen, at first I misheard it as heathen, when Steindor spoke about them, the hidden, living in the sea cliffs. Born to a temporary country, I am one who may also mishear a nation as heathen. Standing thus in the long grass of the heathen valley between boulders, I try to listen. Meanwhile, body and wind conspire to beat me back into basic acoustics of an instrument self, but loosed of words. What did I come here to lose? Because I am also a little dead inside, wonder becomes a painful solve. People who live here don't have the same needs of landscape, I think. Hole inside the studio, again inside historical preoccupations, photographs of bodies, white men looking on. Unlike Anne, here I am not reading Proust, but Teresa Hakkyoncha, because lineage is short for those heathen from nations. Teresa called it temps mort. No placers, new placers, one's whole living rhetoricized as dead time. How important is the root note? In the church, I sang anyway, foregoing words, trying to shape voice into readable arrangements of echoes and feedback. Singing is just a controlled form of screaming, and the singing body source, a red dot located in the sacrum. From there, voice ascends. I learned this from another Korean woman artist emigre. As voice emigrates higher in body and pitch, you see how grows greater also its distance from the red dot. Hence, you must work harder, especially in the head voice, to keep it connected. Admittedly, sometimes I feel married more to distance than to body of a partner. I mourn the red dot, feeling for it. Ethos, another way of trying to get back into possession of or by, heathen as or from, who knows? My husband is a patient man. He braves the blizzard to walk to the market. Once he told me about a guitar player who wished he could open his mouth and have only music pour out instead of words. What is desire? In truth, I have felt more at home inside some songs than in any geography. Occasionally, I dream I'll die in another land, someday uncitizened. I'm still looking for it. Walking along the sea cliffs one afternoon, I met a rock I liked very much. It was black, with orange bits of moss and snow brightening it. What would it be like to hear the rock sing? Eons of turbulence, striated, wind-whipped, a voice from the oldest layer. I know it's projecting to apply music to inhabitation of either distance or place. Dohi says, the power of the red dot will come from your ancestors. Open the gate. I think of Teresa, who was raped and strangled, and Dohi, who chants and drums and dances now, 3 decades later. Meanwhile, I spy my ancestors savoring a sour fruit, while I wrestle to conjure a concept of pitch that may convey them, their atonal unisons, their a-national harmonies, their a-coexistence. I dream of perfect octaves, a drum in the lung, heartbeat in the finger. the hidden in each of us, heathen and heard. Light sings too. In the studio, my microphones are wild with a wind of their inconstant mind. So I give up on plugging things in, understand I don't know how to navigate their electrical tongues. Feedback, like memory, inevitably, always, eventually supersedes source. History is spatial. History is not real, but to shake it. I record one song about hunger. I photograph dead birds amid fragments of photos of other dead. How many in just that one angry trenchful, howling? To our coastline, ship after ship came. My tongue waves flags. People make history what it is. From Teresa, I've learned my lineage may always be one of echoes, transmigrations of words, and or their failure to land anywhere. Seas of wet signal. Now it is November. Same month she was murdered in 1981 when I was a third grader, crossing the playground in trepidation, longing at the laughing backs of other girls, language like history, bottlenecked in the neck. Silence was always my mode, words a power I possessed only wordlessly. Trust the hidden, the chokings on, only insofar as you can toss them invariably inside a porcelain bowl. Surplus cinemas of exilé, exile. I trust nothing that can be pictured in words. The birds began to thaw after a couple of hours. We took pictures until their frozen bodies softened, their blood uncoagulated enough to leave again little smears. It was hard figuring how to hold the birds, what face to wear. It is hard to capture the light in the eye of a dead thing, even in a land that bathes every body in a metamorphic light. I wrapped the birds back up in plastic inside a bag of snow, then carried them back down the stairs into the night. It had been blizzarding for 4 days. At the door, a threshold of ice. A threshold of ice after 4 days of blizzard, exit studio, feather dead weight of birds, still ghosting my cupped palms when a live one flies in. Photographers must know how to both not touch and seize opportunities of light. I've come to understand the body as a necessary country, the placelessness that is a place in me wages against. And I'll stop there and I'll just show this. I don't know if this is visible, but this is an image that's in the book and it kind of goes with the poem. So there are images in this book that are part of the juxtaposition of images and text. So thank you so much. And I look forward to listening to Michele and Endi.
Dao, that was so beautiful. Thank you. And thank you to Siren Nation and to Endi. This is a treat. And thanks for people who are participants. I'm going to read a few poems from Fretwork, my new book, and selected mainly for sort of formal variety, and I think their origins vary quite a bit as well. So I can it's a kind of pastiche. And I have a frog in my throat, so I apologize if it starts interfering with my ability to articulate. Yellow. I call and ask, you are sitting in your yellow chair in the kitchen, waiting as usual, you say, to see what will happen, as you do now these days, for someone to come, something to come clear, waiting to break fast because you have had just a few sips of water this morning, which is not usual. It is unusually early, and also not true as in accurate, but true as in memory, yours, of having eaten nothing, and the thin scree of complaint in your voice arcs in the air, electrical. I say yellow chair, and yellow lets me recall to mind brightly not only the chair, but you in it. Something has turned inside you. Know there is something you should be doing there. It's no one who tells you what. It is like having yellow, yellow, with nothing to fix it to. Is the sound quality okay?
Yes, it is.
Thanks. Thanks, Endi. Competing elegies. The service I'm not having at a church, but the snow shaken down in tufts by small birds whose landings flinch the limbs, falls into itself. Blue holes in the lofted ground snow. It is known that what gives them this weight is distance. Many of the poems in this book circle the deaths of my father, and then some years later, my mother, clenched. His toes clenched, all of him went into the fire. Conjure his body empty, that sack, that final ruin. I can't separate my father from his body, burn it or bury it. They said you have to make a choice. More dark than I thought possible, more topographical than thought, if thought could be almost riverbed. From every direction, you are one long night poured into another night. While your feet were still recognizable as feet, I wanted to place the bottoms of my own against them. Body. My brother grew a benign tumor in a useless organ. You grew a tumor, I said, in the same language I would use later to describe tending the tomatoes. The thymus functions to receive the immature T cells produced in the red bone marrow and train them into functional T cells that attack only foreign cells. The thymus is an organ we outgrow and then it withers. If everything with age withers, never mind, I am familiar with the foreign cell, with the belief that a foreign cell inhabiting a body will always be an outsider. Inside the body is the answer to how the body moves. With slices finer than a scalpel might render, you think now you understand. What do you understand about a corpse? At the body exhibit of shiny interiors, I'm invited to inspect them from multiple angles, awkward to the viewer who twists her neck and leans back to appreciate how bodies in motion are suspended in mind, fitted into its song-red cavity. These bodies are real bodies, I remind myself, in poses, heart contracting, muscle groups engaging. It was so calm inside my brother, the tumor would have killed him if he hadn't first fainted, signaling the doctors to look inside. A faux faint pointing to rather than distracting from the sight. Sometimes I think a sign is just desire imposed upon the arbitrary. Part of the job of a conductor is to point out what now is, how long now is, and when to let the held note go. My mother at the end was a collection of parts flying in loose formation. Never mind that the garment of nervous system tumbles like a gown in strings into the shape of redress. Fretwork. A rummaging. Wings on a low branch and scuffling. The two crows leap back before edging ahead again, poking, prizing the thick fist of moss. I can't see what I feel. The thrill of an intelligence humming near for a moment quiets me. Autumn is upon us. The raptor's moth-colored wings feather up again, beating back the advancing birds, the upper hand, the sharper beak, the bigger bird, the sharper mind, be still. At the opening to the, I let myself in. I don't know why some flowers turn inward at night, why at night some leaves fold face into themselves. Nyctanastic movements are sleeping movements. It is the onset of darkness. I let myself in. The orange geum, brilliant, flat blossomed. The elsewhere hummingbird vibrates above it before flitting off to top itself off on a blossom shape more appropriate. You are out of reach. I am out of sorts, and the crows are at it again, ruckusy now in the high ginkgo or just looking around. And when it's time, they take off, a hurl of crows. Isn't it something to have nothing to do with us? Wouldn't we be better beside the point? This poem I want to briefly preface. So the Columbia River Gorge was created by a series of torrential floods occurring over a period of about 2,000 years, some 13 to 15,000 years ago. The floods that originated in Lake Missoula, where intermittently the dams formed by glacial ice gave way when the lake was breached. The waters scrubbed away the soil and rock, carving out a gorge between what is now Oregon and Washington states. As I say, it happened repeatedly over millennium. The gorge today is full of waterfalls where streams were interrupted and water flowing turned into water falling. If you stand in an exact spot on the Washington side across the river, you'll see Multnomah Falls, the most visited falls in the gorge, which is precisely and not by accident framed on two sides by trees. And this poem is called Scene. Nature that wants to fill in the gap, the falls in, and the eye falls on. That extends a bewildering eye, and in its inexactness, no less a widening makes than what my mind made too much of when you planted a tree in it. I'm always experimenting with ways of reading that poem. It's very stuttery. This last poem also had as its impetus a natural event, which was a full solar eclipse. It was visible from parts of Oregon. It was a few years back, and people were getting into their cars and driving off in search of the full experience. This is called Path of Totality. I caught wind of rains. I watched the sun get bitten into, and as it goes across the river, the cow chokes on a weed. The green weeds. The cow as they enter her. The light here is inconclusive. We are inconclusive, a small event in the bullseye of the path the moon tracks, lugging its shadow along behind it. In perspective, you stand in relation to what you are looking at. I thought I could hold that moment at the edge of totality, after the last desultory breath and before the profound absence. I wanted to. The day was made longer by the shadow folding itself over a folded landscape of shallow-bellied rivers, and I thought I could position myself at the top line where the moon slipped in like a habit to cover the sun disk. The birds quieted. Of the sun, I wonder, is it a relief to have something between you and all these sad worshipers? Where does a gaze end when there is nothing to stop it?
That was so stunning, Michele and Dao. Oh my gosh. I'm so happy to be able to share this space with you today. Thank you for everyone who's listening, and thank you, Siren Nation, for hosting us. I am also going to just skip around a little bit from a few different projects, thinking about process and different ways in. I'm going to start with just one poem from my chapbook that came out this year. It's a series of poems that are in response to some photographs of sea kelp on the Oregon coast that I took. I'm just going to read one entry from it just to share this project. I'm very thankful to Oxide Press for doing this very beautiful design of it. And the entry that I am reading is, let me see if you can see this, so you can see the poem. This is one image of the sea kelp that is in this particular entry. God, the inside of the nation was fanned in fear. God, the inside of the ear was formed of flimsy seaweed straining amygdala seed, so barely readable flat flight, one last pinwheel ghost. Interiors fumbled in chance bundles, bereft trundles, insignias, seals, official branded cumulus fuel of reception and inception, washing each other out, the old seashell cartilage of the ear collapsing. Is it an action to basket listen? Is it a dare? Is it a prayer? Is needing lexicon at all an undulating weave heat? Is it a flood trumpet? Is it a complicit wind unit? A chance fauna, a sense obit, a tide fit? Shh, shh. That's a little taste of that. And I'm also just going to read one poem from my last full-length book, which is called Pool, 5 choruses. And this is a book that explores kind of pulling in and out of multiplicities, choruses. And it was written, I started writing it when we were at war with Iraq. And so there was also that awareness kind of pressing in. This is called, they say the word porous. They say the words deploy and coding and spirit and seas. They say the words forest and porous and Humvee and seed, as if all the same light, as if all the same fighting through leaf, Morse code and night, light at the center, missions and moats, courses of battles, courses of choruses, notorious light tight in the throat, as if all the same might be the throat coding the night, might be the forest, porous the voice, coursing the quiet, light pulping through. They say the words mulching and marching and missile and through. Who were you then, coughing off light? Might be the forest, might be the chorus. You were, of course I am, stemming from this. Might be the missile, missing the night. You were, of course I'm not, stemming from this. Forcing light quiet, might be the forest, rescuing leaf. And I'm going to just spend the rest of the time reading from my forthcoming book. It's called Old Orchid O'Clock. And yeah, it'll be out in about a year and a half. I'm done. I've been working on this book for a long time now. It does in fact explore clocks in time and clock sense and all these measures and instruments that we have to find a way for bodies and spirits to move through. It has a few different types of poems formally. I'm just going to read them straight through. This first one's called I Still the Clock. I still the clock by holding the pendulum coin still so that the mechanism stops and I can sleep without the consciousness of it. To still the clock is the ritual of the demagnification of clocks. It is a kind of violence of fiction for the clock to not function as a clock, while others click and breathe and blink. The eyes blink more before they stop functioning as eyes. The rapid eye movement of dream frightening, being pure pulse, pure frenetic zag force. To watch a gold painted platinum extravagant clock, you're in an excess, you're a fire, you're in competition with the tiredness of time. To hold in your sagging eyelids the still unstill pendulum of the gaudy machination, you're in unison with the aspirant expirations of the day. Second entries, slick article, vertical trust, paperclip we, cubicle apple, slip apple, adverbial heart, weirlet we, seed among the seed. Crawdads being most precise. This is written after I was reading a book about clock history that made the distinction between clock precision and clock accuracy. Crawdads being most precise, most precisely pink in childhoods in which they were first discovered, but never so precise again. Eyelid pink crawdads, painfully translucent pink, so that the exoskeleton was an excuse to see the clocks within them. And when they were exposed under rock silt, it was brutal to find them. So we wanted that brutality, put our noses close to it like the hideous wonders of deep sea fish. They had no need for the armor of skin, no need to not show their precisely wired lead organs. No. Crawdads being most personal, most like persons in childhoods in which they were first loved, but never children again. M and L and C, the crawdads should have been painfully translucent and veined within so that the exoskeleton was an excuse to see the varicose network within the clockwork. So the memory of childhood friends would always be embedded in rocks. M would always be in plaid pants, swinging in wonder, and L would always be the castle clear girl with 5 brothers. And when they were exposed with a stick, it was a wonder to see them move and move sideways in the heart always. Crawdads being most precise when most exposed to the thought of being excessively crawdad. My brainstem was exposed as a cauliflower or a galaxy. Classrooms were exposed by a lockdown. Americans were exposed to Americans. Whole persons were exposed in MRIs or X-rays or ultrasounds, anything that shows the gray matter of the interior clock exposed, so that the exoskeletons were an excuse to not have exoskeletons, people subject to seeing their internal organs, their loved ones' organs, unknown humans' torn organs, their twisted countries' twisted organs over and over. So they had no need to not be seeking rock cover, no need to seek out anything but the unarmored pink accuracy of awe embedded in not clocks, never clocks. I made up some half prayer from starving crawdad flesh, see-through in precision. Second entries, fiddle panic, silent tent, agony point, gingerbread joint. Once the clock is stilled, the creatures come out of domestic fields. To the southwest of the extension of the beak is the horseshoe. A child decorated the horseshoe with mock gems and paint so that it is no other horseshoe. The gems in the horseshoe say the arrangement of gems make the gems. They don't speak, they reflect nothing. They are superfluous as mountains, and we are in awe of them. This is my last poem. It's called Our Entry in Its Free Time. In its free time, the clock tried to pretend not to be a clock. There were exquisite metallic roosters on the clock. The clock thought of roosters emerging from itself as belief sutures. The clock was naked in the locker room, naked in its notch belief. The clock used to believe it held the clocker room clock numb, everyone and their instruments of their instruments. There was an awkward sense of praying in the feather semblance, praying in the bathroom breaks, praying in the moment beaks. I was so close to my family, I couldn't see them merely in time. The clock believed it was getting closer and closer. It had to be unbearably close to the runner's cleats, to the padlock click, to hear itself. I'll end there. Thank you so much for listening to all of us today. And we're gonna move from reading to talking, and really looking forward to talking with Michele and Dao, and then we'll end with some Q&A time too. So as we talk, if you have some questions you want to ask, you can feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll get to the questions kind of near the end of our time today. We do have the ability to go a little bit past 2 if we need to, if people can stay on if they wish to. So we just kind of put together some questions that might be intriguing for us to consider together. And so I'm gonna be the person introducing the questions, and then we'll just talk and move forward. And the first one is just about beginning poems. How do poems, or how have poems started for you? And if there's no general answer that you have, can you share how a particular poem or creative piece started? Dao and Michele.
You want to start, Dao?
Well, there's no consistent answer to that, but I can.
Yeah.
I just thinking about the poem that I read. I guess I can kind of remember the steps of, there being something that happened, and the actual writing of it. Like I was writing along those themes, and it actually helped. Like in this particular case, it's sort of different. Like I did find something external, which was the Anne Carson poem. It kind of helped me think of a structure, or like start to visualize a structure that the experience could fit into. And then it sort of evolved from there. But yeah, no consistent answer on that. I sort of write all over the place. And then the shape kind of comes later, as in like I pull fragments from different places, and it, and I keep doing that repeatedly until like a shape evolves that sticks. So what about you, Michele?
Well, I think similar. There's no single, and I think things often develop through accretion. The compost pile of other lines and words and sounds and so forth. You sort of go through that. But often things start with like a snag of language, or a little bit of rhythm, or some image that's half formed, and but it's sort of something that's slightly beguiling to me or troubling to me, or there's just something about it that I feel like there's something there, and I don't know what it is. Like I was thinking of the poems I read today. This one, that competing elegies, that starts the service I'm not having it at church. And I remembered being sort of tickled when I thought of it, because it seemed like it was sort of a double refusal, which undid itself, like to refuse to do a thing, then refuse to do the thing in accordance with the tradition that you're not going to do the thing anyway. And then I had an image of these birds landing on a snow-laden branch and sort of knocking the snow off completely at a completely different time, unrelated, but somehow probably maybe years later, I don't know how long later, I felt like I can make them comment on each other. And I don't know. So that was just it was sort of enjoyable to feel like something was completed that felt as if it wasn't even in the same universe. And yeah, so I think that's sort of specific and kind of generally how things work for me. That there's a connection, or I'll make a connection. And I think connections are whether musical, sonic, magistic, of whatever sort, syntactical, is where things begin to take on some life and often get their starts as well.
Yeah. I think this completely resonates with just this sense of, I mean, I asked the question and it's almost, the question itself is I hope that there is, however we know to start a poem now, there will be new ways that we haven't found later, so yeah, I mean, there is a variety. I think with any given poem, also, there's no one start point, right? They kind of start in at least 3 places at once, so at least for me, like maybe it may be a sound, it may be an idea, like that Crawdad poem, the distinction between precision and accuracy was something that I was thinking about. And it may be an image, natural forms for me are always evocative, and I like seeing how much an image can kind of permeate and contain, and then contain other things as you turn it over and turn it forward. So yeah, like the crawdad image, I was thinking about how clocks are, there's so much, especially with watches, but also with clocks, there's this kind of history of exposing the mechanism in them, showing all the little gears and showing the interior of them. And we had a crawdad as a pet for a while. My son did. And crawdads also are wonderful, like transparent animals. You can see into them, and so yeah. So just those images kind of nesting in each other is where that poem emerged. And there are, in addition to individual poems, I guess I love it when poems start from poems, and there's a lot of that in my work too. And like there might be a seed of, I hope that the poems in a particular project or book are speaking to each other, and they might kind of unravel forward from a line, or it's not always entirely clear how they're in the same universe for me, but I kind of think of them as constellations on my desk. There's a constellation over there. I kind of want to move to our next question, which is, we already chatted about a little bit over coffee, but I know we have a lot to think about with this, which is, how do you think about the relationship between the language of poetry, between knowing and unknowing in the language of poetry, or like between telling and imparting or exploring? Like how do you make sense of that in your process?
What do you think, Endi?
So I think, kind of writing on the edge of your knowing and is part of the enchantment of writing for me. So kind of, navigating that edge is really important to me in my process in terms of like how the final product, the final poem. I I want it to be an experience for people more in itself, more than a telling about experience. Yeah, that's, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, sometimes it seems like it's a, like, I don't know exactly, I don't really know what knowing is.
Yeah.
I know, I believe that for me, poems are interesting if they, I mean, it's also familiar. We've all heard, surprise, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader, versions of that and so forth. That it's hard to talk about it without feeling like you're going over old ground. But I think that the idea of sort of writing towards unknowing appeals to me. Then I don't have to choose knowing or unknowing exactly. I'm just sort of moving in a direction. And but how to do that, I think for me has something to do with listening to the language, listening to this, both the syntax feels the most significant to my ear. Like that's where meaning and mind and muscle and intensity and all that feels sort of located primarily. So that can take you into realms that you can feel a little outside yourself, both inside yourself more profoundly, but also outside yourself. I guess that's where I want to be, is outside myself. If it's plausible.
Yeah.
It all feels like a process, it doesn't feel like a state that one can achieve.
Yeah. You play a lot with syntax and kind of keeping the movement very apparent in your poems. You can, when you see them on the page. So there's an unsettling, Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
unsettling.
Yeah.
I think a lot of what you're both saying resonates with me. I often think about, or just something the way I describe my process is I'm often on the periphery of my knowing of what I know. And it's like in terms of content, but it's also like in terms of like technique. Like some of the work that I've done, it'll be, like with the hybrid work or something, like there are literally things that I don't know how to do that I'm like deciding to learn, like whether it's like, some audio technique, or it was like, when I first like started laying out the book, it was like learning all the graphic stuff and InDesign and things about, so I like that also, of working in a space that I'm kind of, I think that my sense of knowing is forced to like get out of the way, and something more honest happens, and sometimes it's also more unpolished and like a little more candid, but I think that's a space that I like working in. Michele, you said about getting outside of yourself, but I also think of it as like getting within, like in a really in a way that's like sort of fathomless. Like I don't, like I like to, like I feel like there's a lot of this is self-investigation or self, but at the same time, it's not literal self, or it's not, a neat identity. And I think that it's sort of like, I like the idea of going inward so much that like everything you think sort of, dissipates or falls apart.
Yeah.
That's, I like that too, just that rather than trying to encapsulate it.
Yeah. You're such, I mean, your work going between an instrument particular, going between images and really different types of poems formally really plays with the space of the space of the page so much. And I'm interested in like, how do you, in addition to this kind of residing in the verge of knowing, how do you think about the silence, the relation of kind of silence and language, or the blank page and the language, just kind of the space against which or within which language and images move?
I know we all talked about silence a little bit earlier, and I think that's a big part of it. I think one of the things I wrestle with is like language being limiting, or the urge within language to define and name things and contain. And while like this is the lexicon, or these are the tools, this is what I'm working with, I find that I'm also often like wanting to let go of it, or wanting to be beyond it. And music is sort of like that movement. And like in the book, like there are images that fall off the page or something, you know, like there's often like a sense of like really not being able to contain whatever it is that the voice is trying to express or articulate. I feel like language fails pretty often, even though it's beautiful and wonderful and it does a lot. Like for myself also, I feel like there's like this, you know, we're trying so hard to articulate, or I am, because there's some ultimate failure or disconnection or something that's missing.
Yeah.
So I think often like I'm trying to write toward like not writing, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
It does.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like silence is not neutral. It possesses the meaning and feeling and weight and intensity. And I used to think that the perfect poem would be no words at all. But then you have to shape the silence too. So they feel as if they have a relationship with each other that is necessary, but not always fully respected. It's hard to, well, it's just hard. And, but I feel as you do, Dao, that sort of failure of language, and it's almost inherent in it because it's trying to apprehend something that is not possible to apprehend. And so you have to kind of you have to language around it. And language, including punctuation and all these other aspects of the materiality of language.
We've developed systems in order to try to communicate. I mean, it's amazing. And
I mean, the idea of, I mean, kind of the backdrop of language exposing the frailties of language is really, that kind of resonates with me. I mean, I think the page is always active, or like the white space that is the background is always an active thing. And I like to think of it as like kind of the widest field as possible, the widest stage as possible. Just, and then the language has to, living within that is kind of exposed. Its type of movement is exposed. It's swimming or dancing or crawling, or it's kind of just it's playing with, it's pressing up against that that field, and sometimes failing, and its failures can be very much as true as its successes, right? So so yeah, it's
the effort of like of trying to communicate. I guess it's like that's maybe sort of at the heart of what we're reaching for. I don't know, I don't think we write, but there is some urge to communicate or connect something.
We do have a couple of questions from the audience. I didn't mean to interrupt, but would you like to take a couple of the audience questions?
Sure. Yeah, it sounds like a good time for that.
Yeah, and by the way, your readings were all wonderful, really, really powerful and beautiful. And I love what you were saying about all of you about the failure of language and the struggle to communicate. It's very at the core of a lot of human interactions, and definitely in your writing, I think. So great stuff. So we have a few questions in the chat. One was, I'm going to start with Jay, who asks, I'm curious about the inverse of Endi's first question. How do you end a poem? How do you know when you feel like it's done or ready to be stopped, basically?
That's so funny, because when we met and chatted over coffee, I think we all agreed that is a much harder question. It's I know I stay with poems for a long time. They kind of crystallize and rarely come out in one piece finished. So there's how you know what the actual last line ending is, and then there's how you know a poem is complete. And at best they kind of settle, and the dust settles. They feel settled, and for me, but I go through a lot of time of looking and hearing and rehearing them before I get there, usually.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle, do you want to take that up at all?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think part of it is you don't know, and part of it is sometimes you do know. It just feels this is not going to be helpful to anybody who's got a poem that they're trying to find an end for. But you can feel that it. For me, I have there's certain things that I resist in a poem, like a kind of resolute ending, or I like a kind of often like understatement, or something that feels like it ends but it doesn't end. So what comes, there's a kind of what comes next that's not there.
Mm-hmm.
And those things could be manifested variously. And also, if I'm only doing that, then that becomes its own sort of tick. So I'm trying to not always do whatever is most comfortable, even if what's most comfortable is to feel uncomfortable. But I think another way I've thought about it and play around with it in the process of writing is to have different endings, try ending in different places. So that's one kind of ending that you're talking about, and that it's not like the poem is finished, but here's an ending. And sometimes what happens, I think, is that you end up having to rewrite the first part of the poem in order to sort of, quote, earn the ending that you've arrived at. That there's not enough kind of going on, there's not enough thinking and feeling going on in the poem to have the ending that is more, in some ways, satisfactory, less predictable. And so it changes, or it requires you to change the poem. And since we've all taught writing, that's something that I think about with my students a lot. Is it's not just here's the best last line, but what happens if you end here? You have to go back and sort of excavate more, to arrive at that point, rather than at this easier point that you arrived at a little later. So I don't know if that answers anything, but that's how I think about endings, in part.
Yeah, great.
I would just echo. Oh, go ahead, and you were about to say.
Oh no,
something.
no, I just said that sounds great. Go ahead.
I mean, I would sort of just echo what you both are saying. It's like sort of hard to know. I think there is some sort of maybe intuitive logic or particular to each poem or each piece of writing that that can be felt, or that I can follow or attune to, and it's a really like hard thing to like describe, but there is like some sense of, okay, I've done this work, or like I've kind of got, this much has it has manifested, and I know like I'm working with that. And then I would just like, it is a rereading process.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like listening, maybe it's like listening to what the actual poem or piece of writing is reflecting. And then I do that enough times to the point where I'm not changing things. When I go back through the process of entering a poem again. So
but we have 2 more audience questions, and I have like a million questions of my own, but I just wanted to ask real quick, do all 3 of you, as you're working on working through a piece, writing it, do you all 3 of you read it aloud at various points? Is that part of your process?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a couple of other big questions. One of them is from Tave. So Tave, I'm going to ask you to, I'm going to ask one other audience question, then maybe you can ask your question on camera. How do you enter or prepare for a poetry writing space? From Mariha, I think. Are they still? I can't tell if they're still in the, I'm not sure if they mean a space like a headspace for writing or a poetry writing space with a group.
I was almost wondering if they meant just preparing for the process of sitting down to write, like whether you had your desk and you're like, and now I'm going to do this.
Coffee, always coffee. Yeah, there are certain times of the week and the day where I'm able to focus more because of my work schedule. I usually work right on weekends, and I have, for as long as I can remember, just carved out like a chunk of time on the weekend where I can sit and reserve that, not have to feel like I have to take care of other things. So just knowing that I have that space is important, and then I can get to revisit it at other times that come up, but carving out a kind of given space for myself has been really important. I don't have any particular rituals, and so either, I get into except getting a cup of coffee, sitting down, looking at the work, looking at what I did last time, revisiting it, looking at notes before I start, so that I'm starting with some familiarity of where I left off.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to approach that question. How, what's your kind of writing pattern? How do you get yourself into that? How do you give yourself that concentrated time or whatever you need to do the work?
Mm-hmm.
Down, Michelle, did you want to add anything onto that?
Oh, I was just going to say, I generally start, I don't know when the writing starts exactly, but I collect, walking around and just write stuff down as it occurs to me in the language that it occurs to me, because often it's the language that sort of is what arrested my attention in the first place. So it's helpful for me to do that when I'm pulling weeds or walking or biking or doing something where I'm occupied, my body's occupied. Otherwise, I'm too self-conscious. I can't just sit down at a desk and write. But I can sit down at a desk and fool around with stuff I've got written and add other stuff and that sort of thing. But I have no rituals. I just like a chunk of time, as Endi said, uninterrupted time. If you feel like you're going to be interrupted, it kind of tightens things up. So, yeah.
I would say just to add, like coffee helps mornings. Like I need to be, or the best time for me to work with language and to sort of think deeply is before there's a lot of other traffic in my head. And sometimes it's really hard to find that space or that stillness. Like I spent a lot of hours by myself. you know, in the house. And it's like it's sort of like that sort of space is necessary. And then just, I mean, it's a little bit of like suspending disbelief or something, like just having that, like being able to not be too engaged with like things outside or just the traffic of life, which is, yeah, not always easy.
So many creative people have different times of day and different ways that they approach that. It's really interesting to hear how the three of you think about that. We do have one other question that I think probably is of interest to the audience in general, and then Tavi, if you want to ask yours after that. Do you have any favorite writing warm-up exercises that you would share with us? I guess Michele does gardening, among other things. That sounds like a good part of the process.
Reading helps.
Yeah.
To start reading somebody else's work.
I have it's not formal, but sometimes I write. I have a notebook. I have a document that I call notebook, and I write notes to myself. And they're very fragmented. I mean, it could be like kind of a diary, but but I actually, I've found lines of, you know, things that I continue to work with as poems from that. So I do have like random informal space that I sit down and write. It's like sort of reconnecting to some aspect of myself that I do.
Yeah. Yeah, I have something like that. Like I mean, I like to, I love it when I have something in progress, so that when I sit at my desk, I know where I'm going. And, you know, it's always much more challenging when you're just between projects for starting from scratch with something new. But like if I'm really not don't have something to jump off of, sometimes I'll just set a timer for myself for a certain amount of time and just free write for a certain amount of time, just to get my let go of my editing eye and just kind of get some ideas on the page. And sometimes I don't even use anything in there, but it at least gets my mind and my awareness of language awake, you know, so yeah.
That's a great tip if you're feeling stuck. And it sounds like for all three of you, sort of leaving yourself open to recognizing the things that you want to capture and write down in the moment, as opposed to during your dedicated writing time, is also pretty important.
Yeah.
Tave, we have another Siren Nation person in the audience with us. Do you want to ask your question on camera?
Well, I think actually you might have asked it in just a more condensed way when you said, do any of you speak your poems out loud as you're writing? And it sounded like the answer for all three of you was yes. And my comment had specifically been on I noticed so much alliteration in each person's work. And then the pentameter even, or the matching up of syllables. So, you know, it's a 3-syllable word and a 3-syllable word and a 3-syllable word, or it's different patterns, I guess. And it just got me thinking about that, the hearing of the poem, and whether it's strictly just heard in the head or if it's said. So it sounds like you answered that already. You can certainly expand on that as you want, but my other question, I guess I'll add in, is the performative aspect of it, or the reading of it, the sharing of it out loud, as opposed to strictly being printed on a page. And I know, Dow, you integrate music and stuff with yours. And, you know, where is that line between it's a written gift, as opposed to it's a song, it's an entity in and of itself? That's my other sort of creative comment. And then I'm going to drink some more wine while I listen to your wonderful answers, but I'm 9 hours ahead of you. So I want to make sure everyone knows I'm not, you know, I'm not tipping the bottle in the middle of the day over here. I'm just so delighted to be able to attend this. What an absolute honor to have the three of you. And I'm like, I'm going to tear up again. It's such moving work. Each of you, I had just an amazing, like puncture to the heart at a moment with each one of your works this evening. So thank you. It's really an amazing thing. And I think it's ironic that most of you work in the morning, because it's really almost like creating dreams for people. You know, maybe you're closer to your dream state, but as I'm getting ready to go to bed, I thought, oh, it's just gets my mind going and ready to lie down and dream. Anyway, thank you again, and I'll wait to hear your answers.
Thank you. I mean, I'll just jump in on sort of like just the like there's the performing of the poem out loud, and there's like the parts of it that like it's nice to hear out loud, but like I also feel like there is like a certain type of hearing that happens on the page too, that is also important. And so maybe that's sort of that, I don't know, I call it an inner ear or something. Like there is another level to listen on that I think, like I feel like I have a different experience when I read something on the page versus hearing it out loud. And I like to be aware of that too, or sort of preserve whatever that sort of intimate, like it's a dialogue, but it's not happening, you know, verbally or something. So there's like that, there's something kind of important about that too. And that's, I guess that's what I would add to those thoughts about where sound occurs.
Yeah. I totally agree, Dao. That's yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting process to create something that can be received both visually and orally, and you know, they're both absolutely important. And there is kind of even when you're reading, a sense of, you can sense the sound even if you're not hearing it. So I sound is really important to me in my work. Like I that's it's often how the poem moves, how I play with movement is, you know, how I find myself in unexpected places is through movements of sound. And so I also want the poems to kind of live visually at the same time, you know. So yeah, I'm glad that came across, Tave, with all of the work, and thank you for your perceptions, which yeah, there's your close listening means a lot. Tave, this whole event came out of Tave introducing the idea to me, so I'm very thankful to Tave for throwing the idea out there.
As are we all.
Yes.
Do you mind answering one more question?
Sure.
I was very interested in that you all touched on the imprecision of language, and the same word can mean different things to different people. And poetry is such a, it seems like it's extra subjective compared to prose. People can experience the same poem in very different ways. And I was just wondering if you have ever had somebody write or talk about one of your poems in a way that totally surprised you, like that they got something out of it that was unexpected to you.
I'm trying to think of a specific example of that, but I think it happens a lot. I mean, I often don't know what somebody's thinking about my poem, but when I am given, it's kind of a gift to get that, you know, get a response. But then also they're your friends who are reading it, so that's their job to help you. Yeah, people see things that you don't see because you're I don't know, I'm in my own way, or I'm just because I reveal things that I am aware of subconsciously or expressing subconsciously that that someone else picks up on, or sometimes it's just badly expressed and I haven't been clear, or sometimes somebody's misreading it. So I think it can be all kinds of things, but it is, I think it's kind of funny when a work is interpreted in a way that feels completely foreign to what you thought you were saying. And
I feel like
yeah,
that
what you
relates,
do with it is a whole other question, you know.
that relates a little bit to the conversation we were having before, about how you can't control the reader.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, like there is a little part of it where it's, you write this and put everything you can into it and you have your hopes for how it'll be received. And then it's also sort of given over to the reader to have their own experience with it. And I feel like like for myself, I think I've gone through that process of telling myself that I'm going to do all this work on it, but then once it goes out there, it's sort of like not mine anymore.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's also part of the process. It's like having its own life and relationships at the same time that it's connected to you in this really personal way. So.
Yeah. I mean, readers will always bring themselves into the reading. You hope for that. You want them to, you know. So I that very much resonates with me, Dao. You know, you have to somehow let the poem have its own life once you put it out there. You know, of course, you can do all the work that you can before you put it out there to prevent misunderstandings, or, you know, to open up a kind of field of possibilities of reading. But even at that, everyone will bring their own experience into the reading, and that's you want them to be engaged in the reading. So that's good, you know.
Well,
Yeah.
I want to thank you all again for sharing so much of yourselves in your work. First of all, it is really beautiful and powerful, and for sharing your work and your wisdom with us today.
Thank you so much, Nina and Tave and Dao and Michele. This has been wonderful.
All right, and thanks to everyone in our audience and for the great questions. And you can find out more about the authors in Siren Nation at sirennation.org.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.